Hi there, my name is Matti Sulanto, and in this video I'm gonna talk about the latest Panasonic firmware updates. I'm gonna go through all the major additions and improvements, and I'm also gonna show you how you can update your camera. Before I continue, please consider subscribing to my channel and also activate the bell icon so you'll get a notification every time I post a new video. And I usually post on Tuesdays and on Fridays. 3 days ago, Panasonic published some new firmware updates for some of their cameras. And the biggest updates came for the S1 and S1R cameras, the GH5 and 5S, and the G9, which got by far the biggest update. I'm gonna go through each camera model that I mentioned, but I'm not gonna go through each and every minor improvement or addition that the firmware updates bring. I'm gonna talk about those additions and improvements that I think are important. But if you'd like to see the full list, you can go and check out Panasonic's website, or even better, go to my website, and while you're there, also sign up for my monthly newsletter. But now let's get started with the cameras and the updates. I'm gonna start by going through each camera's firmware update, and after that I'll cover the update process. It's pretty well documented on Panasonic's website, but I got so many questions or requests about it that I will cover that too. Let's start with the S1 and S1R full-frame cameras. First of all, the memory card slot got an update. The XQD card slot now takes also a CF Express card, which I think is really good because it widens your options when it comes to memory cards. These cameras also got some improved compatibility with some ProPhoto wireless flashes, which I think is also good because ProPhoto is widely used by professionals all over the world. And the more compatible any camera is with professional third-party accessories, the more likely it is that a professional will pick up that camera. So it's a good update or improvement. And the next important update or improvement is better compatibility with some Sigma L-mount lenses, and also with the lenses that are compatible with the MC21 converter. You can now reprogram the function button on some of the Sigma L-mount lenses when they are mounted on Lumix S1 or S1R. And also the MC21 adapter now uses the in-body stabilizer together with the lens stabilizer to compensate for the rolling camera shake that I was actually talking about in my previous video when I was talking about the Panasonic's Dual IS. The document doesn't mention which lenses are compatible, but I assume this considers all Sigma lenses that are compatible with the MC21 converter. And the next important improvement is that you can set the exposure values manually when you are using the high-speed video mode that makes slow motion video. That was one of the most wanted improvement on these cameras S1 and S1R, and now it's here, and I think it's a really good and great improvement. And the next great improvement is that if you are using the manual exposure mode but you have the auto ISO on, now you can use the exposure lock to lock the exposure, because even though you are in manual mode, you're essentially using automatic exposure because the camera is adjusting the ISO instead of some other exposure values. So I think it's a good feature that now you can, or improvement, that now you can use the exposure lock. Those are the most important improvements or additions that the S1 and S1R got. But like I said, the full list is either on Panasonic's website or on my website sulanto.fi. please go there and check it out if you wish to see the whole list. Next up is the GH5 and 5S. They both got very similar updates and all the important improvements are exactly the same on both cameras, so I'll cover them together. The first improvement is the same ProPhoto wireless compatibility improvement that the S1 and S1R got. And I think it's a great improvement, like I already said. And then there are some improvements in the autofocus performance. First of all, animal detection is added. And then there's something called autofocus, near shift and far shift. And those functions or features are already in the S1 and S1R camera models. If you have multiple focusing points activated, the near shift will focus on objects that are closer to the camera if the focusing point area covers objects at different distances. And the far shift does the opposite. It focuses on objects that are further away from camera. For example, if you are shooting through some sort of structure or fence, the camera will focus whatever is in the background instead of the structure or the fence. And the focus peaking is also available now on all autofocus modes. And I think that's also a very nice improvement because the peaking kind of lets you confirm very clearly where the camera focused. And the peaking is only visible when the focus is when you focus. So it's not visible all the time because that can be distracting. But only when you press the focusing button, the focus peaking is visible. And the next important improvement is the same manual focus auto exposure lock that also came to the S1 and S1R. If you're using manual exposure with auto ISO, when the camera is essentially in automatic exposure mode, you can use the AE lock to lock the exposure if you want to do so. Those were the most important additions or improvements that the GH5 and 5S got. But I repeat, the full list is on my website sulanto.fi or on Panasonic's website. Please take a look if you want to see the full list. And the next up is the G9, which got by far the biggest improvement or update and some really cool, nice new features. The G9 got exactly the same ProPhoto wireless flash compatibility improvements that the other cameras, the S series and the GH5 and 5S. And then it got exactly the same autofocus improvements that the GH5 and 5S. It got the animal detection and the near shift, far shift features, and also the focus peaking now can be used also in any autofocus mode. Very nice. But the most important updates came to the video. This camera can now do 10-bit 4:2 4K video up to 30p internally, and the same video up to 60p externally. And it makes this camera really a good video camera also, especially if you are any kind of serious video maker. But that's not all. Now there's also variable frame rate, which makes slow motion video shooting a lot better than it used to be. And this can also do HDR video. And if you're willing to pay, you can also get the V-Log L picture profile and waveform monitors. And the waveform is a really good tool in nailing the exposure, especially if you are using the V-Log L profile. And the 10-bit quality really comes on its own when used together with the V-Log L picture profile, because 10 bits is a lot better for grading, color grading compared to the normal 8-bit. So all those video improvements make this almost like the GH5 when it comes to video recording, but it's still not quite the GH5. With the GH5 you can use the shutter angle instead of the shutter speed, which may at first not sound like a big deal, but if you shoot a lot of video, it is a big deal. It's so much more convenient to select 180 degrees or whatever for the shutter angle instead of a shutter speed that is used in photography. Especially if you keep changing the frame rates, the 180 degree angle stays the same regardless of the frame rate. But if you are using shutter speed that you have to use, for example, with the G9, you have to remember to change the shutter speed every time you change the frame rate. But you don't have to remember that if you're using shutter angles. And also, Panasonic's excellent XLR audio accessory is not compatible with the G9. But nevertheless, those improvements that come with the latest 2.00 firmware are still great, and it's definitely worth upgrading the G9 as soon as possible. Repeat again, the full list of updated features is on my website or on Panasonic's website, so please go there and check it out if you want to see the full list. And now is the time to check out how you can actually update the firmware. Before you start updating anything, I think it's a good idea to check out which firmware version you are running at the moment. And it's really easy, just go into the menu and you can see it there. First, go to the Panasonic's website and download the firmware for your camera, and make sure you download the correct firmware. Next, format a memory card in your camera, and then insert the card into a computer's card reader and copy the firmware you downloaded onto the card's root directory, and then put the card back to the camera. And if you're using a camera that has two memory slots, put it in the slot number 1. Turn the camera power on and press the play button. The firmware update needs a fully charged battery, and if your battery is not full enough, the camera will tell you that. And then just follow the instructions on your camera's screen and all will be good. And when the update is finished, the camera will power itself on automatically. And after the firmware update is finished, it's again a good idea to confirm the firmware version in the menu. On the S1 series cameras, the update procedure is a little bit different, but the first steps are the same. First, you download the correct firmware, then format a card in a camera and copy the firmware onto the card and put the card back into the camera. But the rest of the procedure is a bit simpler than on the Micro Four Thirds cameras. You just go into the menu and press the firmware update, and the camera does the rest, or follow the instructions and the camera does the rest. It takes a little bit longer on the S1 series cameras, but it's gonna be all good. And if you want to update your lens firmware, it's exactly the same procedure as with the camera body firmware. You just download the correct firmware for your lens and follow exactly the same instructions. Just make sure you download the correct firmware for your lens, because I once downloaded a wrong firmware and I was already getting a bit frustrated because it didn't work. But then I realized I had a wrong firmware. And if you have Olympus lenses and you have a Panasonic camera body, the procedure is again exactly the same, but you have to go to Olympus website and download the correct firmware there. Okay, what if the firmware update doesn't work? I think there are two possible or maybe three possible reasons. First of all, you didn't format the card, and maybe if there are some other files on the card, they are confusing the camera. And the second reason is that you downloaded a wrong firmware that is not for your camera or lens. And I can't figure out a third reason here. But I think those can be the most common reasons. Just make sure you have the correct firmware and it's copied to the root directory on your card. I'm sure I will get back to these updates later on at some point when I've had time to use my camera or my updated cameras enough so I can comment how those new features really work in real life photography. But right now, that's all I have. I hope you found this helpful. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.